So, a couple of months ago, I got this drill press. It needed a home, a simple drill press stand with some storage. But how did this simple one afternoon build take nearly 2 months?
So, recently I was lucky enough to be able to attend the Aussie Makers Meetup, where I met this guy, Chris, from Built by Chris. In between workshop visits, fence inspections, and a few drinks, we visited Carbotech. While drooling over all the tools and finding Carbotech's new neighbour is being built by my favourite ever building company, Chris noticed that I was eyeing off the drill presses. Maybe it was partly prompted by my better half's not-so-subtle groans every time she looked at the price tag of any tool I was looking at, but Chris stepped into the role of marriage counsellor and kindly offered to sell me, if you're listening, Lauren, give me his Sherwood drill press, as he was upgrading to a new one. So, as soon as I was back in Melbourne, I took a quick drive, totally within the speed limit, as I always am, over to Chris's workshop to pick up my new toy and get a little jealous over his 3D printer.
So, I've picked up a couple of sheets of EcoPly, which is basically the cheap version of Formply, and we're going to build ourselves a nice little cabinet with some storage. Let's get into it.
Now, the main bulk of the cabinet will be made from Formply. Then, to tie it in with the rest of the workshop, I'll edge band the top and drawer fronts with some pallet wood to give it a similar colour to the workbench. However, one question came to mind. How high should a drill press be mounted? Now, after a bit of Google research, this seemed to be a pretty common question. After trawling through hundreds of forum posts, most answers seem to be, less than helpful on the subject. Mostly telling me I should position the drill press at a comfortable height for the tasks I do most often with it. As someone that's never owned a drill press before, this left me more confused than when I started. So I threw logic out the window and guessed. I basically went with the theory of having the drill press handle at around head height, as I figured this would mean I'd be able to easily see what I was doing without bending down. So I threw a quick sketch together of a basic cabinet and headed out to the garage for a quick afternoon build. Using the new pocket hole jig, I figured I should be able to knock out the build in an afternoon. That was until I realised I was actually meant to be on dad duty to give the boss some time to do things. So, with a basic carcass roughly put together, it was time to pack up. The following Sunday, I was back out in the garage, ready to knock out the rest of this cabinet build. One of my struggles of having small bits of time here and there in the shop is keeping my ideas for a build ordered. Now, this is mainly due to the fact I don't work off plans beyond a scribble and what's in my mind. So I guess the simple solution is to plan things out better before I start. But that would take time I would rather use being in the garage making things. Putting the back panel on, I brad nailed to keep the cabinet square and then countersunk the screws through for strength. clenched up to size, I realised the cabinet was racking, basically meaning that the cabinet was going out of square when any horizontal force was put on it. After what took me far too long to realise, the simplest solution to this would be to add an extra small support across the front at the top. With that done, it was time to test how the pallet wood would look edge banding the Formply. Now, you could simply butt joint the corners, but personally, I think a mitered corner looks better. But each to their own. Now, some of you are probably wondering why I even go to all the effort if it's just shop furniture. Valid. My theory's twofold. Firstly, I want my workshop to look as good as possible, as if the space I work in is beautiful, I figure I will be inspired to make beautiful furniture. Secondly, as I really still have no idea what I'm doing, I'm using each piece in the garage to push myself and get better as quickly as possible. Now, don't look too closely at the miter joints, we'll fix those with some glue and some sanding later on. This time, I managed nearly an hour before work inevitably interrupted me and called me away from my happy space. Now, this seemed to be the theme of the build. What was meant to be a quick single Arvo throw together ended up being a total of 7 days spread over nearly 2 months. Between the standard craziness of having a 2.5-year-old and work, then add in the fact that it was Christmas season, I had no hope of carving out extra time in the garage. So, to make up for this depressing fact, I spoiled myself and bought myself a present. No, it wasn't that. On the last day of Bamboo Lab's month-long Black Friday sale, I purchased this. Unable to get time in the garage, I was 3D printing all the things. I even 3D printed some drawer handles for the drill press. Now, don't worry, this isn't going to turn into a 3D printing channel, as sadly, Bamboo Lab didn't respond to my sponsorship email. However, I am starting to see how a 3D printer can be used as part of designs to both improve and make life easier woodworking. It should also save me a bit of money along the way, so hopefully it pays for itself in time. So, now on my 4th day in the garage, I was finally up to installing the drawers, one of my least favourite jobs, alongside sanding. Starting from the base of the cabinet, I work my way up using scraps of wood as spacers, doing one drawer at a time. Not only is doing drawers one of my least favourite jobs, it also turns out it's one of the most boring things to film. So, let's just skip past this bit, shall we?
Anywhere you go, give it all. Anywhere you say, anywhere.
So, to hide some of those nail holes, as well as some of the less than perfect mitres, I simply use a bit of the cheapest glue I can find and some nearly ready to throw out sandpaper. Honestly, I know this is a trick that most people seem to hate, but I honestly cannot figure out why. It hides imperfections better than wood filler, and while I've not used it to fill in any massive gaps, it never seems to show up when I apply an oil finish. Now, all that's left is to attach the drawer fronts, try and get the 3D printed drawer handle centered, and put a bit of tung oil on to bring out the colour. Oh, and attach the drill press as well. This build may have taken me 2 months longer than I planned, but it taught me more than just woodworking lessons this time round. Firstly, enjoy and respect the time you have, and more importantly, don't take it for granted. Secondly, even shiny new toys can't make up for not putting aside time for yourself. Whatever is your version of the space my garage gives me, make time for it and look after yourself.